chest, and it bulges out here and around the bottom. So that now affects this drawing here. When we're coming back up and this upper torso part here is squishing into it, this is going to cause this part to come around like this and around here. That'll affect where we place the tail. Because if the tail is connected to the back of his body, let's say we're looking at him from a 3/4 rear view, here's the volume of his rear end, but this is a rear view here, there's the center line coming through the rear, then I'm going to want to have that tail connected to the surface on an ellipse that's sitting right there. Right, so the tail would come out like that. So then that then continues my center line from the body down to the tail. So if I had little spines or something like that, I could then connect them properly in perspective to that spine, so that when it gets around this part here, it's no longer, we don't actually see the contact. Here we'd see the contact point on the surface of it, but as it rotates away, it's turning in perspective there. When it comes back here, we would then see the center line coming down here, so we could put a spine on there like that. And on the bottom side, we'd see, on the underside here, we'd see a center line coming through like that. So now it adds dimension and form to that shape, a three-dimensional shape to it. So the reason I'm talking about this is because we have to consider, where does that center line through the underside of the tail wrap around down and through into the crotch of the character. On this drawing here, does the tail come out here off the body? Okay, so if that's the center line of the tail coming down through like that, then we have the back end point here, and we probably have the other side coming through like that. So that now then creates the volume of the tail going around like that, so we can see it in perspective. Do you understand what I'm saying? We're creating a three-dimensional form here, so we have to understand, where is that tail actually going to connect? I just arbitrarily threw the line in here to describe the path of action. But remember, the path of action is not always necessarily the outside edge or the inside edge of a line. It could be the center of a line, which is also part of the line of action of the character. Okay, so there's path of action, which creates a movement that something flows through. A line of action is either the inside or outside or the spinal line through a character three-dimensionally. So we have to think in terms of, how are we drawing our character and what's the form that we're dealing with here. Okay? There's a few things you have to start to think about once we get to this level. And I'm just introducing this to you. Okay, I'm not expecting you to become a genius at it immediately. I'm just introducing you to the idea that this is where we're going with this stuff. So that as we progress into second semester, we start drawing characters, doing, as the second semester students are doing right now, they're doing the character jumping up and down. We have to think three-dimensionally on the character. How is the character's feet planted on the ground in a three-dimensional plane, so they don't look like a cardboard cutout? So now our next drawing here is when we're stretching it up. So as we stretch up here, again, we're going to get that compression point on the body here, where it's still pushing down because we're forcing the character up into the air. And here the tail is going to flow back down and through this line right here. Our next drawing, number 10, we're starting to ease up into the high point. Now here's where we can start to release the upper part of the body, so that it goes back almost to its normal state of being more of an oval type thing. And I'm just going to put a little bit of an arch into the character's back here, because as the character comes up, being forced in this direction here, they're reaching the high point and going to arc over. So I want to put a little bit of an arc in his back, just to get him to sort of sit more like this. Fingers in here. Make this a little bit bigger here. Again, that's just an issue of the line of action running through the character. And as the ball arcs over in this direction here, I'm going to pull his chest forward in this direction. And then this is my high point. Nope, not quite my high point, almost. Just easing into it. Now here's where your roll flipping comes into play, because we're not actually in betweening, we're straight ahead animating. So we've got to make sure that everything that we're drawing is flowing from one drawing to the next, that we're not shifting things into weird positions. So here's where you have to roll flip your drawings to see, is this doing what I want it to do? And if it doesn't, then you've got to make an adjustment to it. Okay, so you don't want this to jump out in a weird direction. So now here's my high point. So I'm just going to do a slight compression on the body there. See how I've brought the upper part down just a little bit because he's reaching his high point, and I'm just letting the upper torso settle. And then when he starts to drop down now, this is where I'm going to begin to stretch it. But I'm not going to do it on this drawing yet. This is where it's arcing over. So I'm going to keep his body with basically the same shape. I could just shift and trace it actually, because I don't want any change to take place here. This is where your overlapping action kicks in. So I'm not going to have the stretch begin on the very first drawing as it begins to drop, because I want it to be delayed. So I'm going to delay it by 2 drawings. Not this drawing, but the next drawing is now where I begin to do my stretch. So here now is where I'm going to take this part of the body here and start to ease into it a little bit more, so that there's not very much movement at the top. It's like I'm putting a pin in the neck part of his chest here. So it's beginning to stretch this part here out like this. So you'll see how the top doesn't move very much, but this part here is moving about 1/4 of an inch. So here's where I'm beginning to do my stretch. Okay, so I'm starting my pull, which is the delayed action, and now I'm starting to get into my stretch position here, so I'm going to stretch it even more and make this upper body movement very, very little, just a little bit, but not a lot, and get even more pull into the body here. We'll see what it looks like as the character arcs over here. See how it pulls on it? Now I'm getting more stretch here, but here's where I'm going to let the body catch up. Of course, I might want to make little modifications to it. Like you can see how the angle of the body here, the lower torso, doesn't quite match up with the upper torso. It looks slightly weird. So what I can do is I can go back in here and just modify this ellipse and just shift it over just a little bit so it's not quite as much of an angle as this. I'm bringing it more down this way here. So I'm just changing the axis line to get more of a pull coming in this direction here. See, and again, this is the neat thing about animation, is that when you work really rough like this, you can make changes as you go. So if your initial piece of animation isn't quite doing what it wanted to do at the stage when you're starting to add other parts onto it, you can just go in and modify it and make it work. Because once again, with animation, nobody's going to see it until it's done. So you can go through any number of different incarnations on this thing until you get it exactly the way you want it, and then that's when you present it. So it's the same as being a real live actor in a play. You go through numerous times when you're just practicing, rehearsals, over and over and over again. And then once you've got it down and you've modified it, the first time you act something out might not be the final version of it. You try something out, see if it works, then you try a different way of doing it, see if that works better, try another way, and then you finally hit on exactly who this character is and the way they're acting. And then when you go to the final opening night, that's when your character is set. So it's the same thing with animation. These are all practice runs in your rough stage to see, is this where you want your character to go? And again, I'm just going to put a little bit more of a stretch on here as he comes down into this impact point with his butt. Here we bounce back out again, so once again, I'm going to compress the body down, put a little bit of a pull on it here. Coming up to my next high point. But this is all about control and knowing exactly what it is that you're doing with your character. You're the person that's doing it. You're the person that's drawing it. You're the person that thought of it. So every time you put a line down on paper, you should know what you're doing. There is no animation fairy that's going to come to your desk in the middle of the night and go through all your drawings and go, oh, these in-betweens are not very good. I better fix them for them. Ping! And all of a sudden, they're all beautiful drawings. So when you walk in the next day, you pull out your drawings, you go, well, thank you, Animation Fairy. You fixed all my drawings for me. This is wonderful. Okay, it doesn't work that way. I used to think that, actually. How wrong I was. Either that or they really do exist, but they just don't want to play with me, that's all. They don't like my animation. So you have to learn how to fix your own stuff. And that's what the pencil testing is all about. Is rigorously going over it and over it and over it in order to see what it is that you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. So now the ball is rotating over here, and this is where I'm going to begin to stretch it. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a hold position at the high point there. It's moving just ever so slightly, and I'm tilting it back a little bit. And now we're beginning to pull down. So I'm starting to stretch it out. My big stretch here. And again, I can modify this to match the line of action coming from the body now. You can see how that's tilted just a little bit too much. I need to get it going more like this. So I would just trim this edge here off and shift this part here over a little bit as well. But I've got to be mindful of my overall volume as well. I might have to add something over here. I'm just going to end off with the next couple of drawings because now we're getting redundant in the fact that it's the same type of action. It's just being minimized now because there's less and less to it. So I'm just stretching his body out here. Again, following the overall path of action that's running through the body. Okay. So that's the hard hit point actually, but we're not showing it because that's the contact point. This is the stretch. We don't have that compression. We could always drop that in as an in-between if we wanted to, and if your timing is set so that it's all on twos and it looks correct, which it should. If you've got the same number of drawings that I've got and you shoot it all on twos, it'll look right. So now once your timing is solidly set, if you go to drop an in-between in here, you have to shoot that in-between on ones. You can't shoot it on twos, otherwise it'll slow that section down. So you can still drop in-betweens in, but you just got to be careful of your shooting sequence. So here we're going to do a little bit of a squish. Like that. Okay, so then it's just going to finish off with the final bounce over to here, and then the roll to a stop, which I'll let you do that as well. Now I'm just going to come back here, and I'm just going to add in the tail, just to finish off the action so you can see what's going to happen here. So we've got it roughed in there. This one's going to pull down like this. Then it begins to arc. So once again, I'm just following the path of action that's been described in the first drawings. I'm just going to draw it as a little couple of lines trailing here. Now in this one here, this is where it's starting to reach its high point. 12 is not the high point, 13 is the high point here. So I'm going to start to curl out of that line of action a little bit. Keep the tip of the tail down like that. So it starts to pull up. This is where we're releasing the energy now. And here's the high point, so I'm going to curl the tail up here. Okay, but I don't want this curve to go this way. I want it to stay going this way as a C curve. And now it's going to start to come down. So here now is where I can turn it into an S curve. I can reverse the curve here and bring that tip of the tail up and over like this. Now we're starting to pull, so I've got to follow the path of action, but I'm still going to lead or let the tip of the tail go up higher. So here's my overlapping action. The body is coming down now, but the tip of the tail is still going up. And then it's eventually going to catch up in this drawing here, where the pull becomes hard.